Hey YouTube, Philly J with Different Dimension Gaming. So today is different. We had a request to do a deep dive on the Predaplant deck. Now I'm not really sure what that means. So I guess what we're going to do is talk about why we're playing every card and why we're playing those ratios of every card. We'll talk about the main, we'll talk about the extra, and we'll talk about why we're playing certain ratios of what. So to get us started, we are playing 3 Orphis Scorpios, and we're playing 3 because it is the best normal summon in the deck. Hands down, this is the one you want to see in your hand more than anything else, and you especially want to see it paired with your Predaplast. So what this does is you special summon a Predaplant from your hand, and then you add a Predap card from your deck to your hand, which then gives you a card to discard for your Orphis Scorpio effect. And the card you most want to discard is going to be one of your 2 copies of your Predaplast, because 1, it can help you chain block your Darling Tonya Cobra. So just off of the effect of your Predaplast, you're getting 1, 2, 3 cards of advantage. Because what you want to do is your Predaplast will summon 1 from hand, and then you add 1 from deck to hand. And then your Scorpio has to discard a monster for its effect. And because when you send Predaplast to the graveyard by any means, it triggers. So if you discard it from your Orphis Scorpio, you get the effect, and you can use it to chain block your Cobra, because you go chain link 1 Cobra, chain link 2 Predaplast. And because you've got a couple other cards that will search your Predaplant cards in general, you're okay with this getting negated. But you do want the Cobra to resolve every single time, because it is a specifically once per duel effect. And we're only playing 1 Cobra because you don't want to see it in your hand. Now that doesn't mean that it's dead in your hand. It just means it's really hard to work around being in your hand. So as far as your Predaplants go, these are the ones you don't really want to open. But if you happen to open Practice and Scorpio and Predaplast, you can add one of your other Predaplant cards to help you garner some advantage. And cards that will pair nicely if you open specifically one of these, if you open exactly these 3, is you could search for something like your Clammy Dosendu, which is also a fairly strong normal summon. Or you can search for one of your scales, being your Bufollicula or your Triantis. So again, it just depends on the hand that you open and why you want to search specific cards. Now, Clammy Dosendu is a card that will help you get advantage if for some reason you don't get access to your Cobra, because if we use its effect to fuse itself in our Orphis Scorpio, we can get access to our Ambulinoides, which can tribute itself or another Predaplant you control, or a monster with a Predator counter to summon Cobra from the deck, and Cobra only resolves if it's summoned by the effect of a Predaplant monster. It's an extremely specific effect through a summoning condition, and it only works in a handful of ways to do so. Now again, this is the best 2-card combo in your deck, but that's not to say it's the only 2-card combo in your deck. Now, because we're playing a lot of cards at 3, something like our Branded Fusion can be used to send Fallen of Albaz and your Predaplant Predaplast, which will then let you summon your copy of Lubellion, and then you can chain block however you want. because you can go Lubellion 1, Biplist 2, Lubellion discards for cost. So whatever you have in hand, even if it's a second Biplist, or the only Biplist, you can discard that, and then on a new chain you can gain the advantage once again. But if you happen to open something like Branded Fusion, Albaz, and Biplist, you can discard anything, and it's not to say that your cards don't have effects in grave, because you can get some recursion going. But it does discard anything, so you can discard something like your Edge Imp Chain, which will also help you gain a lot of advantage. So much of this deck is focused around gaining advantage and putting it into fusion summons to completely lock your opponent out of the game. So you can Branded Fusion for Albaz and Biplist, summon Lubellion, go Chainlink 1 Lubellion, 2 Biplist, discard the chain for cost. Then you can add your Orifice Scorpio to your hand. And then on the fusion summon, you can fuse itself and the Albaz into your Mirror Jade, because you still have the Albion in your extra deck. Again, it's just finding the lines no matter what you open. So it's just a matter of knowing how to go from your 5 cards in your hand to the best end board you can come up with that hand. Now, that's not to say that you will not have some absolutely garbage hands. You know, sometimes you'll get a hand like this, and it's genuinely almost an unplayable hand. But there is not really any combination of 5 cards that says you cannot at least put something on the board. Yes, opening a couple one-ofs that are bricks sucks. But if you open a way to fusion summon, you've always got a line in this deck. So if you even have to set the Super Poly, and set the Call by the Grave, and set the Light Hex, you've still got a play. You can Super Poly your opponent's board, and your monster. This is always treated as a fusion substitute monster. So if your opponent's on an extra deck card or something, even if they're on the Snake Eyes, once they get out that Link Karibo, you can hit them with the Super Poly, discard your card, use the Light Hex as your Albaz, and suddenly on the field you've got a Mirror Jade. Now, that's not to say that this is going to out the Snake Eyes deck, but it's at least going to handle it in some sort of fashion. And then if they've got an extender, you've also got an interruption. Again, this whole video is going to be about finding lines no matter where they are. And it's not often that this deck bricks, in all honesty, guys, but no deck is perfect. So let's talk about some of the cards you don't want to see in your hand. So these 4 cards are the ones you would rather not see in your hand. Now, the Light Hex is at the top of the list of cards that if you do have it in your hand, it's not the worst thing in the world. But these 3 are genuinely bricks. Now, these 2 don't gain you any advantage in your combos, and this one doesn't gain any effect if it's normal summoned. So these are the 3 worst cards to have in your hand when you start the duel. Just simply because they do not garner you any advantage. Now, it's not to say that they are not useful, because no card in this deck is not useful. If you open, let's say, any 2 of these 3 cards in a polymerization, you've at least got access to something. Now, if absolutely nothing, let's say you open exactly these 5 cards, you can still do something. Now, if you open exactly these 5 cards, you do have a couple options to go into. You can either summon your Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, which is not a bad way to control the board, and it gives you follow-up with both of these in the graveyard. Or you can summon your Chimera Flesia, which can also give you some follow-up. Because the standby phase after Chimera Flesia is in the graveyard, you can add any fusion or polymerization card from your deck to your hand. And because you can add it in the standby phase, you can add pretty much any of the many, many, many fusion spells that we play in this deck. These are all searchable in your deck. They are both searchable off of your Chimera Flesia and your Darlingtonia Cobra, which is why this is one of the best cards in your deck. It's just one of the worst cards to open in your hand. Because Instant Fusion is one of the single best cards in this deck. It's probably your best one card starter. Because if you Instant Fusion into your Ambulinoides, you've got a ton of follow-up to do. Now, on summon, it adds a Predap card from your deck to your hand. So you can add your Chlamydosindu, you can add your Scorpio, you can add your Bufollicula, Triantis, Biplisp, Practice, or Planning. It gives you access to your entire Predaplant lineup. Then it's got a second effect where if you tribute it, you can summon a Predaplant from your deck, which will be able to summon your Cobra, which will trigger your Cobra's effect. Because it is being summoned by the effect of a Predaplant. However, if you open Instant Fusion and Scorpio and any other monster, it gives you ready access to an easy negate off of one card. So you Instant Fusion into your Ambulinoides, you can add your Scorpio to your hand, then you can normal summon the Scorpio, activate its effect, discarding whatever monster to give you access to your Cobra, and your Cobra will add any fusion spell from your deck to your hand. Now, again, it's a simple line, but it's easy to get lost in the sauce. There are a lot of ways to fusion summon in this deck, and it's very easy to get confused because there are so many lines that end on so many similar boards. A lot of people think this is a very one combo linear deck. It's not. It appears that way because of the consistency, but there's a lot of moving parts in this deck at all times. It's a lot of interacting on both players' turns, but mostly on your turn, and then confusing, slowing down, and full out stopping your opponent on their turn. Because you've got so many one card starters, you can do some pretty crazy combos off of very little in hand. Now, if you happen to open Instant Fusion and Predapractus, you've got almost a full combo. So if you Instant Fusion into your Ambulinoides, you simply add Scorpio to your hand, and now you've got access for your Predapractus to activate it and summon your Scorpio, then get access to your Biplisp, which you can discard off Scorpio, and then you can summon from your deck your copy of Cobra. And then you can go Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2, and now you've got access to something like your Scales, which are incredibly powerful in this deck, because your Bufollicula is just a polymerization. But if you open Bufollicula or Triantis, you can simply search the other one, and Triantis lets you fuse your Pendulum Scales. Again, incredibly powerful card. So let's say you do this combo, you go Biplisp, you add the Bufollicula, and then Cobra can add your copy of Branded Fusion, just for an example. Now you've got the Branded Fusion follow-up, you've got the Scale, so you can make one of your negate cards. Through just the cards on the field and your Pendulum Scale, you've got for sure access to 4 fusions, possibly 5 depending what else is in your hand. You've got access to your Dragostapelia, your Trifer Overtone, your Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, and your Garuda Wings of Resonant Life. Those are all for sure. But depending what else is in your hand, you've also got access to Magnum the Reliever, which is one of the best cards in your extra deck because 1, it helps you recycle your fusion cards, and 2, it's an Omni Negate. So on summon, you can target that Instant Fusion, put it on the bottom of your deck, and draw a card. Then you can go your Branded Fusion line, and now you've got a fusion card engraved to banish off of the Magnum effect for an Omni Negate. And you're drawing a card off of this simple minimal combo. So off of just these two spells, you've got access to, for sure, 6 fusion monsters in your extra deck, putting in minimal effort and not using a normal summon. Now, a lot of people are going to try to shotgun the first thing you do. So sometimes the best thing to do first is activate your Branded Fusion. If your opponent wants to take the bait and negate it with an Ash Blossom, that's fine, because you've got enough follow-up in your deck that you can still make an established board while playing around the hand trap. And if you're playing something like Triple Tactics Talents, you can also draw cards, rip cards out of your opponent's hand, because they've fallen for your bait and negated a simple fusion spell that you do not need to establish a good end board. Now, a lot of what I've talked about is going first, but what if you're going second? Well, there's a little card called Predaplast, and a lot of people don't think it's very good. I think it's criminally underrated. What this card does is you reveal Predap cards in your hand, being spells, monsters, trap, whatever, and you put predator counters on your opponent's monsters equal to the amount of cards that you reveal in your hand. Now, Clammy Dosendu is a polymerization on legs. However, if your opponent has a monster with a predator counter, it is a super polymerization that you do not need to discard for. The only caveat is that your opponent can respond. However, if they are willing to respond to this effect, it should tell you they don't have a lot of follow-up, because if they're only willing to sacrifice 1 or 2 monsters to a simple monster effect and not use something like an imperm, and they just want it off the field, then you know there's not a lot of follow-up. And if you are lucky enough or skilled enough, depending on how you look at it, you might have the Super Poly in hand anyways. So a very cool combo is to activate the Predaplast, reveal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many you want to reveal, depending on your opponent's board, because the mistake you might make is you want to put a counter on everything, and you don't need to do that. You need to put counters on just enough things to get the board dealt with. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2, and yes, sometimes it's 5. But if you can reveal 2 or 3 cards just to show it off, let your opponent know you've got follow-up, you activate the Clammy Dosendu, and they take the bait and they activate the imperm or the monster negate, you just follow up with Super Poly, discard one of the other Predap cards that you reveal, and now you've taken their board and you've established yours. So it begs the question, what can you summon with these 5 cards? Well, if you reveal all 3, maybe you can make 3 of your opponent's monsters dark. The only thing you have to remember is your Chimera Fleecia has to be involved in the fusion summon. So you normal summon it, you activate the effect, they negate it, you change Super Poly. What can you use? Well, now you don't have to use this on field to make the fusion summon. So you can take your opponent's 2 dark monsters, because the predator counters make them dark level 1s, and summon a Starving Venom. Or because a lot of monsters right now are level 8 or higher, like the Flame Bears, maybe you summon the Greedy Venom. Maybe you summon the Chimera Fleecia, the Dragostapelia, the Trifer Overtum, or even the Garura Wings of Resonant Life, just depending on what your opponent's willing to give you in terms of advantage. Again, 6 options off of a 1-card combo. So much of this deck is based around using your opponent's cards against them, punishing your opponent for having the audacity of sitting down across from you. Now, a lot of what we've talked about so far is your Predaplant cards, but what if you open no Predaplants? That's where cards like this come in handy. Now, any combination of these 5 cards also gives you some card advantage. Now, the patchwork lets you add the edge imp chain and a polymerization from your deck to your hand. Now, this is another 1-card combo into with any of our other monsters in order to give you some card advantage. Because when the chain is sent to graveyard, it also replaces itself with the patchwork. So these two are a constant engine, once per turn each, but constant in order to keep giving you card advantage because some of your effects need to discard. Now again, your opponent might use Ash Blossom on this, and that's fine because if you open this and you activate this first and they go, okay, Ash Blossom, now your Branded Fusion's free. You know it's free because they've already wasted the hand trap. You go through your whole branded lineup, maybe you open the Fusion Destiny as well, and it's fine as long as you activate the Fusion Destiny last. This is always the last thing you do on your turn. Always. Because once you activate this, you are locked into Dark Hero monsters. Now, if we come all the way back here, all the way to 11 minutes ago or whatever it was, you have a different line you can go for. You can use the polymerization, any of these 3, and your light hex into your Lubellion. And then you can Lubellion into your Mirror Jade. Now it establishes a different board, and it's either a less good board depending on what else is in your hand. If it's exclusively these 5 cards, then this is probably the better play. Because what you can do with this play is once the Mirror Jade is out, you can use its effect on your opponent's turn to get the Albion in grave. And then in the end phase of your opponent's turn, you can at least add the Branded Fusion from your deck to your hand. And while that won't do anything to help your combos, what it does do is facilitate a card to discard for an interruption or discard for a fusion summon, or at least make your opponent think you've got follow-up. So again, any of these 5 cards, or exclusively these 5 cards, at least sets you up with a card that can provide you with an interruption and then follow-up. I honestly don't think any 5-card combination in this deck that allows you to achieve absolutely nothing on your side of the field. In fact, upon further investigation, this is the exact 5-card combo that will only let you have 1 card on the field on your end phase, and that will unfortunately be set 1 and pass. Now you can set any one of these 4, but exclusively these 2 will give you at least some sort of potential follow-up on your next turn. So if by some miracle you open exactly these 5 cards, you set one of these 2 and hope for the best. So outside of exactly this hand, exactly this 5-card hand of 1 card, and in this case 1 of 2 card bricks that normally are extenders, are now just the 5 worst possible cards in your hand, and every deck has some sort of combination of 5 cards that lets you achieve nothing. Maybe it's just 5 hand traps, maybe it's 5 cards you can't use. Whatever the case happens to be, every deck can produce a hand that does nothing. And as far as Predaplants go, this is that hand. Now this does not give you nothing for follow-up, because if you set the Predaplast and it goes to grave and your opponent does not OTK you, you at least get the Predaplast to get you some sort of advantage on your next turn, no matter what that is, because it will add any Predap card from your deck to your hand. And as we've just showcased, there's a lot of Predaplant cards that will take you a long way on their own. So if you were wondering what the absolute 5-card combo was that achieves next to nothing, there it is. The Branded Fusion and the Predapractus lock you into fusions, but this locks you into Dark Heroes. And that's fine as long as you can see the line and the way to get there. Now, if you go Patchwork, add Chain, and a Polymerization, and you open either of these two cards, you've still got access to follow-up. You can play your Polymerization to fuse your Light Hex Shield Fusion and your Edge Imp Chain. Summon your Rebellion, because in this fusion summon, the Hex Shield Fusion is going to take the place of Fallen of Albaz, and your Chain is going to function as your Dark Monster. On the inverse of that, if you open Edge Imp Chain and the Fallen of Albaz, you can still make the Rebellion, but if you open Albaz and the Light Hex Shield Fusion, you can summon Albion. And Albion is a 1-card combo into Dragoon. In this instance, we are using the Light Hex Shield Fusion simply as a light monster. Then once you've got the Albion on field, the Albaz in grave, you can use Albion's effect to banish itself and the Albaz into your copy of Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. Again, 1-card combo gets you an Omni Negate. Now you don't get the effect to destroy a card on the field, but that's okay, because the better effect is the Negate, and the effect you care more about is the Negate. Because this card can't be destroyed by card effects, and it can't be targeted by card effects, which means it's very, very powerful. It's a 1-card control the game, possibly for the entire game. And we haven't even used our Branded Fusion yet. This is simply a Patchwork activating poly to fuse any combination of these cards. It's all about finding a way through the weeds. Now it's very important to remember, and I screwed this up in my first deck profile for this deck, the Light Hex Shield Fusion cannot be treated as a dark monster or as a Predaplant monster. It has to be a named monster, and the only named monster in this deck is Fallen of Albaz. So if you open the Hex Shield Fusion and the Albaz, that's okay, because you can treat it as the light monster, or you can treat it as the Albaz and treat Albaz as the dark monster. It's all about just navigating a way to get out a board that your opponent will struggle to break. So one of the best hands you can open in this deck is 5 spells. This will get you access, if it goes uninterrupted, 6 points of interaction on your opponent's turn. Now, I'm going to walk you through this combo. We're going to go kind of fast because we've done a couple combos already, but I want to explain why we're doing everything that we're doing. Now, we're going to start with the Fright for Patchwork because we're going to try to bait that hand trap if it's out there. We're going to grab our Polymerization and our Edge Imp Chain. So if they don't stop that, they probably don't have any kind of interruption in their hand. So we'll follow all that up with our copy of Instant Fusion, which will get you your copy of Ambulal Melodies. Now on summon, its effect is going to activate to add a Predap card from your deck to your hand. We're just going to grab that copy of Scorpio. Now you can follow that up with your Predapractus, summoning the Scorpio, and adding from your deck to your hand your copy of Predaplant Biplisp. Now on a new chain, you're going to activate your Orpheus Scorpio, discarding the Biplisp to summon from your deck. You're going to summon the Darlingtonia Cobra, and then again on a new chain, you're going to go chainlink 1 Cobra. Always chainlink 1 Cobra because you care more about this effect than you do the effect of your Biplisp in the graveyard. So Biplisp will be chainlink 2. The Biplisp will grab you your copy of Predaplanting, and your Cobra is going to grab your copy of Super Polymerization. So from here, you're going to activate the Branded Fusion. You're going to send your Albaz and your Light Hexial Fusion to the graveyard, and you're going to summon your copy of Albion. Now with Albion's effect on summon, you're going to banish the Fallen of Albaz and the Light Hexial Fusion, and you're going to summon your Red Eyes Dark Dragoon as your 5th summon. Now if your opponent wants to activate Nibiru here, you've got the protection. Now from here you can activate the second effect of your Angular Melodies, tributing your copy of Cobra and summoning from your deck your copy of Calamity Dosendu. Now, in an open game state, you can activate the Calamity Dosendu to fuse itself and the Angular Melodies into your copy of Dragostapelia. Now what we can do is we can activate Polymerization. You can fuse the Albion and the Aegium chain in your hand, and you're going to summon your Magnum the Reliever in your extra monster zone, or you can summon the Dragoon in your extra monster zone. What we're trying to do is avoid columns 2 and columns 4 to escape the relinquished anima. So on resolution, we're going to activate the effect of Magnum. We're going to put the Polymerization, and for the sake of the combo, we're going to just add the Predaplant Bufollicula. Now what you can do is you can activate the Fusion Destiny to fuse your Celestial and your Dasher into your copy of Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. Now at this point we're locked into fusions, and now we're locked into Dark Heroes. So we're in a pretty okay board state as of right now. We're going to set the Super Polymerization, and you're going to set the Predaplanting. That leaves you with 2 cards in hand. 1 for the discard off of Dragoon, and 1 for the Super Polymerization if you don't get a chance to activate the Predaplanting, which you absolutely will. So on the end board as of right now, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of interaction, 2 cards in hand as follow-up, plus additional follow-up depending on what you send off of your Predaplanting. Now, far and away, the best option for this will be your Predaplant Biplasm, because that will give you access to your Predaplant Triantis. Now you've got an additional piece of interruption. If you fuse on your opponent's turn into a dark monster, you can banish the Predaplanting and destroy a card on the field. So now, because you activated your trap card, you've not only used a piece of interruption, you've given yourself a second piece of interruption. So now you're on 7 interruptions on your opponent's turn. Now if they get you enough resources to activate the Predaplanting and the Super Poly, you're going to want to discard your Fright for Patchwork. And you're going to want to do that because you really want these scales in your hand to do a very cool play. So if you happen to go Predaplanting and Super Poly, maybe you fuse your Scorpio and 2 of your opponent's monsters into your Trifer Overtone, which now gives you an 8th piece of interruption. Now, on your turn, you can draw, whatever card you happen to draw for turn. So you draw an Aegium Chain, and put any card here. It can be whatever you need it to be. Now you've still got your Magnum effect to shuffle one in the bottom of the deck and draw one card. And it needs any fusion or polymerization card. And if you don't use his effect on your opponent's turn, that gives you 4 options. And as I was setting this up, I realized that I myself got lost in the sauce because we did not activate Albion's effect in the end phase of our first turn to add the branded fusion to our hand. So again, pick your card to add to your hand, to put on the bottom of your deck. Obviously, it's going to be one of these two because these two are not going to be very useful anymore. So I'm going to go with the super polymerization because I like to punish my opponent. And again, you put it on the bottom and you draw a card. Whatever card you happen to draw is fine, because now you've got an incredibly cool follow-up. You're going to go into your main phase 1, 5 cards in hand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of interruption on board. Now, if you want to do the cool play, what you're going to do is you're going to pretend these 3 cards aren't even here. You don't even need these cards anymore. You're going to scale your 2 Predaplants. You're going to use Bufalicular's effect to fusion summon, and Triantis' effect to use your pendulum scales as monsters to fusion summon. So you fuse these 2 into your Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon. Now, Greedy Venom is a neat little card, but it's not neat yet because you have to resolve these 2 guys first. When Bufalicula is used as a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or face of extra deck, you can add a Predaplant from your face of extra deck, except for itself, to your hand. So now Triantis goes back in your hand. Then Triantis, if it's used for a fusion summon and sent to graveyard or face of extra deck, can put a Predator counter on an opponent's monster. So now, once again, you're using your opponent's cards to your advantage, and you're going to, after you do that, you've still got 4 cards in hand and potentially a Predator counter on an opponent's monster. Now, Greedy Venom is almost a custom card. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. When Greedy Venom leaves the field, it destroys as many monsters on the field as possible. So that means our Dragoon is safe, and if you sequence it right, your Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is also safe. However, if you resolve the Triantis, and for some reason your opponent's monster is protected, you can bring back your Trifer Overtome, because if your opponent has a monster with a Predator counter, it can summon itself from the graveyard. Now back to Greedy Venom. When it's destroyed, you can banish a level 8 or higher dark monster from your graveyard and summon itself back to the field. That effect is not once per turn. However, there is a once per turn on this card, but it's a soft once per turn where you can target an opponent's monster and make its attack 0. Now that's a good effect, but it's better because it also negates the monster's effect. So this is 2 turns, a full board, easily game on board, 4 cards in hand, 1, 2, 3 pieces of follow-up, possibly 4 depending on your draws, a full graveyard, and about half your deck left over. This started with 5 spells. If you do not check this deck on a combo, you will lose that game. The amount of recursion and the amount of interruption that this deck can put up is nearly unbreakable if this deck is not checked during the turn. And because you put out a Omni Negate on your 5th summon, it means you are protected from Nibiru. It means you are protected from potentially any interruption your opponent has from that point forward, as long as you have a card in your hand to discard. 5 spells, 8 interruptions. And that's not even the perfect hand. Now, as of that combo, you only used 8 cards in your extra deck. So you've got 7 left over. You've got your Starving Ground Fusion Dragon, your Predapower, Chimera Flesia, your second Ambula Melodies, your Mirror Jade, your Lubellion, and your Garura. Now, if you were going to have flex spots in your deck, I would say it'd be these 2 cards. But if you are insistent on cutting a 3rd card, it would be the Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon. And this card is not great going first, but going second, it's an incredibly powerful card. So you've got a ton of follow-up. You've got potentially 3 flex spots depending on the build that you want to make. You've got 5 cards minimum in your extra deck left after an 8-card interruption on your opponent's turn, which I know Snake Eyes is very strong. I don't know if Snake Eyes can play through 8 pieces of interruption. Now, obviously, every deck has its weaknesses. So let's talk about those. One of the biggest pieces of interruption that this deck loses to is the super polymerization, because a lot of what we end on are dark dragons. Now, some other unfortunate pieces of interruption are something like infinite impermanence, where if your Orphis Scorpio or your Ambula Melodies get negated, really struggles with those Predaplant follow-ups, and you might have to rely more on your branded cards. Another big hit for this deck is the Droll and Lockbird. These are probably the 3 biggest weaknesses of the deck. You do a lot of searching and a little bit of drawing in this deck, and Droll hurts a lot. Unfortunately, Droll is everywhere in this format because of Snake Eyes. Now, the 2 other pieces of interaction that don't affect you as much are the Ash Blossom and Nibiru. Properly is a non-factor because you can negate it with your Dragoon if you get it out on your 5th summon. In fact, your opponent might try to force it out, and you're going to have to negate it because you want to keep your board established. Now, they cannot activate Nibiru and then chain Imperm on the Dragoon because Dragoon cannot be targeted. And the Ash Blossom, if you sequence your plays properly, is almost a non-factor against this deck. Now, sometimes you open hands that do lose to Ash Blossom, and unfortunately, every deck has those weaknesses. But it is very rare, and honestly, if you open a hand that loses to Ash Blossom, you probably opened a piece of interruption like Fusion Destiny or Super Polymerization to play around it on your opponent's turn anyways. So these are the 2 biggest pieces of negation you'll have to deal with, then the Imperm, then the Ash, then the Nibiru. So I'd go, if you're ranking 1 to 5, I would go like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of how or what the deck loses to. Actually, probably go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because we do a lot of searching, Droll is an enemy, but we are playing Call by the Grave just in case. And if you're torn between Call by against Droll or Ash, you want to hit the Droll because the Ash is something you can play around. Now, unfortunately, Super Poly cannot be responded to. So we just have to take that one on the chin. But if your opponent's Super Polys you, that means they're giving up 2 cards in their hand, and now they've only got 4 left, assuming they did not hand trap you on the turn before. Now you can respond with your own Super Poly after they summon their monster, and you can gain advantage off of what they've done, and because they've given up some of their cards, you take their cards and use them against them as you would any other turn. The imperm is kind of a tough one to call because if they don't negate the right thing, you just continue on with your combo, no problem. So as far as cards you don't want imperm used on, your Scorpio, your Calamidosindue, and your Ambula Melodies. These three are your imperm targets. Try to avoid them as much as you can, but sometimes it's just unfortunate and you get hit with them. Now, the Ash Blossom is kind of a tricky one because a lot of players will just shotgun the Ash Blossom against Branded Fusion, or a lot of players will just do it against the first thing you do. So it's important to know how to sequence your plays, which is why we are always trying to bait it as the first thing that we do. That's why if you open it, Fright for Patchwork is always the first play you make, because worst case scenario, they will droll you afterwards, and at least you've got the cards in your hand to make something of a board with. However, if they Ash Blossom your Patchwork, you can pretty much continue your combo for free after that. Now, the Nibiru is, again, the worst interruption against our deck, because if you know what you're doing and you take the patience and the time to learn, your Dragoon should almost always be your 5th summon, if not sooner than that. If your opponent lets your Branded Fusion go through, make Dragoon immediately. If you activate Branded Fusion and they let it go through, you're going to send your Albaz and your Light Hex, and you're going to make Albion, and you're going to activate Albion, assuming Imperm is not also in their hand. You're going to make Dragoon as fast as you can, and that will stop further interruption on your opponent's turn. It's very rare that you cannot at least make Dragoon or Magnum by your 5th summon. Now, these are your 2 Omnis in your deck. They've both got a cost that you're pretty okay with, because a lot of the cost that you will have to deal with will give you an extender. For example, the Magnum is a free banish of the Branded Fusion in your graveyard, or the Instant Fusion, Fusion Destiny, whatever. It's basically free as long as you don't banish some of your cards that you can replace in your deck, withdrawing them and possibly having them for follow-up. The discard off of Dragoon is also very important to know what you're getting rid of. You don't want to discard your follow-up cards. Now again, if you've gone through your turn and you went pretty much uninterrupted, and you still happen to have one of these 3 cards you couldn't not either resolve or added to your hand in your turn, these are your discards for your Dragoon. Because if you've already summoned it, this card's dead in your hand, you can get a replacement Branded Fusion, and the Patchwork is kind of a whatever card on the follow-up anyways. Because if you're putting up enough negation that you use the Patchwork successfully, you don't really need it again on the crackback. So, I know a couple people are going to be here just for the giveaway. So let's talk about it. Quarter Century Rare Predaplant Dragocepalia. There are 3 things you have to do to enter this giveaway. 1, you have to subscribe to the channel. 2, you have to like this video. And 3, you have to comment down below either what is your favorite card or your favorite deck. Now, you can tell the truth, you can lie, whatever you want, but if you don't do those 3 things, and you have to do all 3, you will not enter the giveaway. Now, we will announce the winner of the giveaway 2 weeks from the posting of this video. Now, this is being recorded on April 1st, so if the video goes up on April 2nd, it will be, the giveaway will be, winner will be announced April 16th. But if the ban list drops on the 2nd, this video will go up on April 4th, in which case the reveal of the winner will be on April 18th. So keep your eyes out 2 weeks from now. Remember to do all 3 things, and I will announce the winner in that video, and you will have to get in contact with me on some form of social media, either in our Discord, on X, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. I will, if you are not going to my locals, you will need to send me your address. I will ship this to you as soon as I can. So, after a very long video and a lot of me talking, please like and subscribe. If you want to see more videos like this, comment down below about what decks you want to see me do this for, and I will do my best to follow up. But with that being said, this has been the deep dive on Predaplants, and we'll see you next time.